In the honor of the new year, today we're going to talk about 25 different things that you can do to help yourself be more competitive on the medical journey while still being happy. Let's get into it. Number one is to have 2 scheduled activities for yourself each day that is not school related whatsoever. I know one of the biggest shifts for me in med school was looking at an empty calendar, and normally I would schedule all my study time first, but instead I started scheduling my workouts first, evening activities like watching an NBA game, going to a dinner with my fiance, now wife, hanging and doing a Zoom call with my family, something personal that I actually was looking forward to, and put those into my calendar first, and then I figured out what to do with the leftover time in terms of school responsibilities, and that allowed me to feel like each day had something waiting for me, usually at the start and at the end. So if you feel like you've lost a piece of yourself during your medical journey, try this simple hack out. I promise you your motivation will already increase. Number 2, this is a study tip, and one of my most important, is to get to your review method as quickly as possible. Again, during medical school, a lot of my initial struggle was just spending way too much time in the note-taking and acquisition phase, going to lecture, writing down outlines, watching other videos, rewatching lectures, trying to get these pretty notes that I would never have time to review, and then the test would just be around the corner without me realizing it. But once I was able to flip that and realize that here are the 2 or 3 study methods that you really enjoy that help you review the material quickly, let's get to those as quickly as possible from the time the lecture is presented. It allowed me to just do more reps of the material, allowed me to be a lot more prepared for the test. And if at any point during this episode, if you feel like you want more details and strategies about what I'm talking about, then go ahead and click down below to 2 resources. One is our free med school handbook. It's basically a detailed document of a lot of things that we'll talk about in today's video. And 2, go ahead and check out our white code lab, where I teach kind of 3 pillars on how to study better, how to be more productive, how to be competitive while still being happy on your medical journey. Number 3 is to have in your monthly schedule 1 to 2 career exploratory kind of activities. Now, if you're a pre-med, this could be something as simple as doing some kind of shadowing. If you're in med school, this could be shadowing as well. It could be a research project. It could be working at a free clinic in a specialty you're considering, showing up to a conference, just interacting with the specialties that you're interested in. And the reason is that when you're early in medical school, you are so hyper-focused on the performances of your scores and your grades. And yes, those are important, but in reality, by the time that you get to the time of applying for residency, for future jobs, people want to know why you want to go into a certain field, and it's much more easy to tell the story if you have a story. When you can say, during my first semester of med school, here are the 6 experiences that I did, and 3 of them were in plastic surgery, and I loved them. And so I kept doubling down, and I found that this was my niche, this was the specialty that I was going to do because of X, Y, and Z reasons. You're much more convincing. You know for yourself what you want to do because you've just given yourself more options to explore. So find 1 or 2 things you can put in your calendar, send those emails out about shadowing, about research, about just showing up to conferences to learn a little bit more about the specialties that you may be considering. It allows medical school to feel like a development into your future career versus just another kind of journey into the next test. Number 4, this is a big one, have a clock out time. I've told this story before on this channel of somebody who was significantly smarter than me in medical school, and her and I were walking to our cars at the end of a lecture day, and I remember her telling me her evening routine was simply to study and then basically pass out at her table or make it to her bed if she could, wake up the next morning, come to class, and repeat the whole cycle. To me personally, that sounded miserable. Regardless of how smart she was, how well she was doing, it didn't seem like the life of 4 years of medical school and beyond that I wanted to do as a future physician. And so personally, I started instilling a clock out time. This was usually 7:30 or 8:30, where I would say after this time, unless there's a test tomorrow, you're not going to be studying anymore, because I didn't want to go to bed as a med student. I wanted to have at least an hour or 2 of personal time to interact with the people that I love, doing the hobbies that I enjoyed, or just relaxing before bedtime. And that way, next day I could be a little bit more fresh. And so have a clock out time for yourself. If you have still things left to do, look at your calendar based off the strategies that we'll talk about in this video and figure out how you can plug those things that are still kind of left to be done, and still give yourself permission before bedtime to say, this is me time, school is done for the day. Number 5, used buffer-based scheduling. Now, first of all, if you're not doing some kind of calendar system, I highly recommend it. I really am a big believer that those who fail to plan to fail, and having some kind of calendar system where you can look and visibly be able to see when your lecture time is, when you intend to study for certain classes, ideally even what lectures you plan on covering and what methods you plan on using during those hour chunks, when you plan on hanging out with your friends, working out, going to bed, having time off. All that is important to visibly be able to see so you can understand if you're over or under committing. But often one of the most challenging things about scheduling, particularly when you're busy in medicine, is that one activity starts to blend into the next one, and you may not be finished with the first activity, but it's already time to start the second one, and that causes you to fall behind. And so one quick thing I was able to do early in med school that has worked wonders for me and a lot of the med students that we work with is have a little bit of a buffer where your first activity is 15 15 to 30 minutes longer than you expected it will take, and your next activity is similarly going to be starting 15 to 30 minutes later than you kind of initially want to start. This gives you about a 45-minute window where the first activity could bleed into the next one without you sacrificing on when you intend your start time to be. And the same thing if you have 2 or 3 activities stacked one after another. So that will require you to get a little bit better at assessing how long a certain activity will take, and that will come with experience. But having that buffer really avoids that oh crap moment. You can nicely wrap up the first activity and then still have time to transition to the next ones. Number 6 is to have at least half a day off per week. Now this is more tied to med school, for residency and beyond, or other phases of the medical journey. Definitely more challenging, but look at your calendar and try to see if you can give yourself the equivalent of half a week off. For me, it was simple. It was just Friday evening. So once I finished my lectures at 2 or 3 during the day, anything after that point was just me time. It was time meant to hang out with families, to hang out with colleagues, to do absolutely nothing. But there was no studying scheduled unless there was a test on a Monday, for example. And that allowed me to recharge going into a weekend, which was really intended to review a lot of things coming from the prior week, as well as any upcoming test, and allowed me to get some good night rest, allowed me to enjoy a lot of Friday activities, whether that was sports or going out for some fun activities with my med school colleagues. But having this afternoon to evening slot where I knew that majority of the time this was protected for me allowed me again to have another opportunity to just relax, reset as a med student. Number 7 is pick an easy form of fitness that you can commit to. Exercise is obviously such a big essential part, but when you're busy as a student, when you're busy as a trainee, as a resident, as a fellow, like I am myself, it is very hard to find time to exercise. And so first, you don't have to be exercising 45 to 60 minutes a day, every single day in the weight room. You can do something in the comforts of your apartment, your home, or just pick something that is 20 to 30 minutes. It could be cardio related, it could be weightlifting, it can go going for a walk, a run, bicycling, playing a sport, doesn't matter. For me personally in medical school, that was as simple as going to the gym 3 or 4 times a week in the morning before going to my classes. And then once a week, instead of going to the gym for a workout, I would simply play basketball with my classmates. And that was 4 to 5 days of fitness. I was able to get my exercise in, which kept my health as optimized as possible as you could have as a med student, which allowed me to show up better for things like rotations and the studying. Number 8 is a big one. Start planning for your test prep 10 to 14 days before. One of the biggest things that I'd recommend before every semester, or if you haven't done this right now and you're in the midst of a semester, is to put on your calendar all of your test dates and then go back and put the day that you intend on starting to actually study for that upcoming test or quiz. So if you had a test coming up 2 Fridays from now, then work backwards 10 to 14 days and say when will be the first day of review. This allows you to do a few things. It tells you how many kind of lectures you have to cover in that period, how many lectures you have to cover on average, how many you'll cover on Monday through Fridays, and if Saturdays and Sundays you're going to have more of a review process. And then using your visible calendar, you can say, okay, this time slot during this Saturday, for example, is intended for prepping for that upcoming exam. This time slot is intended to review material that was reviewed this week. And that allows you to visibly be able to see, is that possible? Do you have to change your test prep? Because one of the most stressful things for any test, especially for med school, you have a lot of material, and the longer you wait to actually start the process, the more you realize you should have started sooner. And so 10 to 14 days was my sweet spot where I found that I could sufficiently study for an exam, have 2 to 3 passes of the material on top of what I had already done, feel confident without overly interfering with my day-to-day studying for the other classes that I also had to prep for. Again, if you're interested in tips like this to help you improve your optimization of your studying so you can improve your performance, but doing it with less time, go ahead and check out the White Coat Lab to understand exactly how to study better, do it with less time, be more productive, still be happy and competitive at the end of it. And number 9 is another study tip. Know when you're going to review the material the first, second, and third pass. Whenever I'm working with a student on how to improve their grades in med school, a lot of times they think that I'm going to just give them the resources that is going to fix that problem. As you probably know, one resource probably doesn't fix your performance. But one of the biggest things that has made a shift for a lot of these students is simply a schedule of saying, this is when you're going to review the material the first time, this is when you're going to do it the second time, and here's when you're going to do it third and fourth. Because most of your classmates, most of my classmates, are probably just cramming for their second and maybe third pass of the material. They didn't feel comfortable enough going into a test. Understandably, getting that third to fourth to fifth rep before a test, before a quiz, really allows you to have that comfort saying, I've seen this enough times, definitely pass, and I'll be able to do better than the average because the average is not doing this level of work. They don't have the system. And so you can pick whatever rules you want. Sometimes we will tell our students to review the lecture the first time the same day that they learned it. Another time during the week, they just put it on their calendar saying second pass. And then in the month that they're reviewing for a specific block before the quiz or the test, they'll have a third review scheduled in there. And again, this is just a sample format, but as long as you know when you review a lecture for the first time, this is when I'll come back to it the second and third time and get my reps in lesson before the test or quiz, you're golden. Number 10, another study tip, because they're obviously very important, have a separate method on how you review your weakest topics. One of the biggest issues going into a test is not just preparations and reps like we talked about, but is often the fact that you know that out of 10 topics, maybe 4 of them are like super weak spots. Like you just hope that those 4 don't show up on the exam, or at least 2 of them don't, because those are your, oh crap, I wish I reviewed this more, where you know something is weak and you hope it doesn't show up on the test. That means that you have not given it enough attention to make it at least an average level of comfort and mastery. And so if you can do a good job of evaluating as you're learning something, is this like an average thing? Is this something I'm really good at? Or is this like a super weak point where I don't understand it even after the first 2 passes? Once you can differentiate and stratify where certain pieces of information are, then the next time you come for your second and third, fourth pass, a lot of times we recommend to our students is to go to those weak spots first, because it makes sense that if I had a spectrum where the green was my strongest topics and things that were color coded on an outline as orange were like average, red meant I hope this doesn't show up on the test. If I could minimize all the reds and then the orange and make sure I have as much green as possible going into a test day, I am much more confident. I am much less prone to anxiety and kind of freak outs and panic attacks during the exam, and I will probably do just naturally better. And so having a different method after you've kind of color coded or understood where your weaknesses are, of saying, let's work on these the best. And if you're interested in some of these study methods, you can check them out in this video right here on how I got a 3.9 GPA in med school and all the study methods I use for them. I kind of break them down step by step. And as we talked about before, I get a lot more detailed on all of those in the White Coat Lab if you're interested. Number 11, we're going to take one more study tip and then we'll transition a little bit. Number 11 is to start with your most effective study method to begin the day. I know that the times where I was so stressed and felt like I got very little during the day when I would start the mornings with things that felt like they were the right things to do. And that meant watching the lectures from the day before if I hadn't, reviewing a video from a high yield resource. And often I would just spend an hour or 2 doing those things and then really not feeling like I got very much out of it. And back in med school, my go-to strategy was doing flashcards for a majority of it. I talk about that in this video, which has been checked out by 1 million+ people. So if you're interested in what that strategy is, check right here. But using that strategy, I was like, duh, Lux, this is what you should be doing a majority of the time. So as I would wake up and I transitioned to using that method as the first thing that I did when it was my study time, I found my grades go up, found my comfort improve, found I was able to do those reps a lot quicker. I had a lot more free time because my most effective method when my energy was at the highest was being used. And then when I was like tired, I was using that time to watch the lectures, to watch the Boards and Beyond videos or whatever it may have been that I wanted to do. I just didn't make that my first thing of the day. So figure out what your most effective study method is. If this test was tomorrow, what would be the method that you wish that you had used the entirety of your prep? That's ideally what you kind of go to and try to make that the first thing you do during your study time. Now, number 12, not a study tip, but this is super helpful to avoid that kind of afternoon lag, is to learn how to utilize power naps. Now in med school, a nap may feel like something you haven't done since kindergarten on the medical journey. Totally understand it. And you probably already know of the feeling of the afternoon slump where you've had your lectures, maybe you've had lunch, and now you're just tired and you don't want to study. Once I learned how to use power naps, which is a combination of napping strategically for like 20 to 30 minutes with a little bit of caffeine. I always have some coffee with me around the afternoon times for this exact reason. If I'm feeling really tired, I'll have a few sips of the coffee, go ahead and lay down for a 20 to 30 minute nap. And then with the power of science, which I break down in this video right here on how to use power naps effectively, you will wake up a lot more refreshed, almost feels like you had a great night's sleep instead of a 20-minute kind of like groggy wake up feel. So if you want to take short naps that help you feel rejuvenated for the rest of the day, learn how to use power naps, and I'll break that down again in that episode here. I'll also link it in the description below. Number 13, this is more than studying, but is to learn how to tweak your systems weekly. I'm a big systems guy because now, keep in mind, I'm a cardiology fellow, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, I run this content and YouTube channel for you guys, and then I play tons of other roles in my life. And so I have to make sure that I'm as efficient and effective in all of those as much as possible while still being sane and happy and enjoying all of them. And so in medical school, the same applies. You have a system on how you study. You have a system on how you manage your time, how you stay happy, how you stay competitive. And I teach those in all the videos. I teach those in all the resources that we talk about in the descriptions, but you have your own systems that you're using right now. And instead of saying, this is what that fancy person on YouTube is using, learn how to evaluate your systems currently and saying, what part of this actually works well for me? Which one should I double down on? And what parts of this can I like shave off or change a little bit to make it work better? So ask that on a weekly basis for how you study based off the grades you're getting, how well you're learning and retaining. Do the same for how you're managing your time. Do the same for how you're managing your motivation, your happiness level, your competitiveness, and every other kind of system that you feel like you need to have to be the person you want want to be. If you do that on a weekly basis, a few things happen. You're always kind of looking for the flaws in what is you're using, but you also are looking for kind of the benefits and being optimistic about your system. Because if you don't, often what happens is you go a month using a certain study method, certain study resource, a certain way to manage your time, and you're like, this is not working. And you just throw it out the window and you come up with something else that may not work as effectively, when in reality, all you had to do is just stick with that first method you had, find the pieces that were working and just double down on them. And over time, you would have come up with something that would actually have worked for you. So tweaking versus these 180-degree shifts is a model that I really am big behind on the medical journey. Give it a shot yourself. Number 14, minimize your study resources to 1, if not 2. In reality, if you think about it, all these companies that are making resources for board prep, for med school, for rotations, if you just picked one, they all will work well. There's a reason that they're all popular, is that there's been enough students that have used that specific resource, that have found it helpful, that they have a referral system and a good way to market those results, that more people are going to use them. That is true for First Aid, for UWorld, for Pathoma, for Kaplan. Think of the resource. There are thousands of people that have used it. So the question is not what is the best resource out there. The question is, which resource do you enjoy and enjoy the most that you can commit to and show up consistently? So it's less about Boards and Beyond versus Amboss versus Pathoma versus Sketchy. It is pick a few of those resources that you think are useful, do some review and research before you commit to buying them. Find the one that you think has the best kind of mold to you. If you're able to get an older version of that resource from a classmate or online, give it a shot. And if you like it, then go ahead and commit to that resource and make it your go-to. Stop looking around after that, because in reality, the resource is not going to be your saving grace. The reps of that resource that are high quality is really what's going to make sure that your grades and your board scores are where you want them to be. Number 15 is a big one for that motivation and kind of happiness component, is always have time for those people outside of your medical world. Because although you may love your classmates and your colleagues, and I definitely did during my experience, when I was with them, we almost always talked about med school or something related to it. But whenever I was talking with those individuals in my life, like my family, my fiance, and now my wife, my friends who were just not in medicine, it was refreshing to not be able to talk about all of the things and hecticness that was going on in med school. It allowed me to feel like a normal person. Here, I felt like I was always complaining about the small things of the medical journey. It made me kind of despise certain aspects of it. And when I would go to my outside world, most people didn't even understand what I was complaining about. And so I was either complaining about all the studying I was doing, which at some point you just get tired of complaining, or I was just enjoying time with them, which is obviously more important. So make sure you have in that calendar, whether it's a few times a month, a few times in a week, every single day, whatever you want to do, to have time for those people outside of your medical world. Number 16, if you are ever behind and procrastinate, surprise, surprise, happens all the time, learn to play catch up piece by piece. A lot of times when I'm working with students and they're telling me that they feel procrastination, or maybe they just got behind, not because they're procrastinating, but they just didn't plan accordingly and they overplanned and then just weren't able to get everything done on a specific day, or maybe they got behind on their lecture reviews and things started stacking up. Often the solution for some reason ends up being something like, I am 10 lectures behind, so I'm going to review those 10 lectures and then I'm going to somehow catch up on the lectures that I'm currently having to learn. And all that does is create a system where you're just constantly behind. So let's just say you're 5 lectures behind and every day you're learning 3 lectures. Instead of saying, I am going to spend the next 3 or 4 days catching up on those 5 lectures and I'll spend the weekend catching up on the 3 lectures per day, so 9 lectures that I'm having to really cover real time, just say I'm going to add 1.5 lectures to my 3 lectures review each day. That allows you to constantly, first, make sure you're not getting further behind, and 2, allow you to just kind of piece by piece play catch up, not be hard on yourself for being that far behind, and also feel a sense of progress every time you're like, well, cool, today's lectures were reviewed and I was able to do a little bit of my catch up work, and by this weekend, ideally, I am all the way back on track. And that is a much easier way of playing catch up, of not kind of getting stuck in this procrastination, getting behind wheel, and a simple system to do just that. Number 17, evaluate your energy flow. Now, seems very kind of feel goody, but in reality, we all have certain times of the day where we work at our best. For me, it's in the mornings. For my wife, it's in the evenings. And so if I know that if either of us have a project, I'm going to be working at them at the time of the days where no one wants to wake up. And she's probably more effective at doing those from like 8 to beyond. And that is just the type of energy flows that we have. But you have to understand exactly when you're at your highs and your lows. And so find the times of the day where you feel like you're the most effective and do things like find your most effective study method and do it then. And then find the activities that don't require a lot of energy, maybe require more time, and try to do those during the times where you're in your afternoon slump. So again, for me, if I had to watch a lecture, I would do those in the afternoon because all I have to do is just sit there and listen. But if I was going to do something like active review, like flashcards or doing things on a whiteboard, those would be in the mornings. And in the evenings would be time personally for myself because I was like basically basically running on empty. Again, that may be flipped for somebody who has this energy flow like my wife, where the mornings may be a little bit of like a pick-me-up, and by the end of the day, you're at a much higher kind of level of energy of focus to do those things that require a lot of your time. Number 18, if you're somebody who loves to-do lists but also hates the fact that you're never able to actually check everything off, flip it and instead have a list of done. This was one of my first pieces of tips I ever kind of gave when I did the MDJourney. It's like one of the first blog posts that I wrote, and it's simply the aspect of, instead of having a to-do list and always being a little bit disappointed and ashamed how much left there is to do at the end of the day, having a separate list that was really meant to build your motivation and just write them down every time you would accomplish something. So I was done reading lecture 1, I would just write lecture 1 reviewed, and then so forth. By the end of the day, I was able to see how much I really was able to get done, and that allowed me to have much more motivation for any activity that was left in the day. If it was like a morning activity and I had to do more activities in the evening, or just motivation going to the next day. Number 19, if you feel like you're losing motivation on the medical journey, it happens, even for me, try the golden nugget method. This was something that I started doing early in med school, where simply anytime I had a great experience, whether I studied my ass off to get a good grade on a test and it worked out, whether I showed up for a patient and just made sure my rapport was top notch, or I just learned something that I found to be like super interesting and stuck with me, and I paid attention a little bit differently, more actively, where I was able to make a difference and interactions with my classmates, whatever it may have been, just kept those stored back in my mind. Now I do it more digitally, but having this kind of growing list of experiences that made the journey very unique. Anytime I feel like, man, I haven't had a patient experience I've really enjoyed in a while, I would just go back to the last time that I had one of those, or look at the ones that I did and saying, is it worth putting in the same level of effort that I did back then to have that amazing experience with this patient, or having this amazing test performance? And the answer is always yes. And so then it motivates me to say, perfect, you want more of these results, put in the same level of input, and more than likely over time, you'll have more and more of those. And so eventually that becomes my new norm of hard work in my studying and my patient interactions, etc. And I'm able to have more of these golden moments. And that keeps the motivation even easier going forward. Number 20, we're coming to the end. This is a big one, also a big regret of something I didn't do early in med school. So listen up, you're early in your journey, is to start developing a second brain for both your learning and retention, as well as your experiences. I'll start with the second one, since we just talked about the golden nugget principle. It feels easy in the moment to say, I'm always going to remember this for the rest of my life. This patient experience is going to stay with me. I'm just going to know this patient's name, what was going on, all the things around the situation. And shamefully, I can tell you that's not true. There have been experiences that I felt would be life-changing for me in my career that I kind of remember a glimpse and details of, and I wish that I wrote them down, at least had them digitally stored somewhere. Same things for pearls that a professor or an attending taught me at bedside, and I was like, man, this makes so much sense. I'm gonna remember this forever. And now I don't even remember what the lesson was, much less how they taught it, or the pearl. And I feel like there's so much medicine that I lost because I just didn't have a way to store it somewhere that I could easily go back and saying, what did they teach me again? Same thing for when you're learning things by reading articles or on your rotations or actively in your class, having a second brain and just a digital hub that's saying, I hope I remember all this, but if I don't, I want this to be stored somewhere I can easily come back to. And so one of my favorite methods of using a second brain is RemNote. It is a tool I've started using for the past 2 years. I link down below exactly how I use RemNote to study as a cardiology fellow. My second brain kind of concept is taught throughout that video if you guys are interested, so I'll link it down below as well as right here. But your digital hub can be anything. It could be a Google Drive, it can be just a big Word document, it could be something fancy on Mac. I don't have one, so I don't know what resources you guys may have available to you, but finding some kind of digital way of storing your retention, things you learn, and those small kind of golden nuggets and pearls that you're like, I hope I remember this, but again, I would hate even more to forget that I had known this at some point. Number 21 is the tunnel vision philosophy. Your med school classmates are going to be amazing, impressive, but they're also going to cause you a lot of stress and anxiety if you always focus on what everyone else is doing. So once you figure out that this is my plan, this is my system, this is the way I'm going to do things, ignore everything everyone else is doing until you feel like there's some kind of crack or cracks and things you want to improve in how you study, how you manage your time, how do you study for your board exams. You want to just avoid at all costs asking others how they're doing certain things. Be inspired by your classmates, but don't always be looking for sources of inspiration when you feel like your system is working just fine. This is why it's so much more important to start tweaking, find out what's not working, ask others how they're fixing fixing those components small enough. Instagram and social media is also a big culprit of this, where you feel like everyone's doing these profound methods. In reality, all you just need to do is make these small tweaks. So the tunnel vision philosophy of ignoring what everyone else is doing, use your classmates as inspiration, not competition. At the same time, use your systems to help you understand where you need to improve, get that advice from the best people you know, then come back, implement, and ignore everything. Number 22 is to reevaluate each test very strategically. That is basically going in and looking at not just the grade, but how you felt going into it. If you felt like after taking the test that you're like, I don't even know what half these questions were, they were not in the material that the professor taught, that is simply an indicator that you were given a test that's unfair, can't do very much about it, and you just move on from that one. Can't judge yourself from that performance. But number 2 is if you look at that test and say, I recognize some of this material, but it didn't end up in my flashcards or my outlines or whatever I used, that means that you have to kind of reevaluate how you're taking those notes from your classes into the material that you're ultimately reviewing. And number 3, if you're like, I actually recognize that from my flashcards and I still didn't get it right on the test, that means that you either need to do more reps, be more focused when you're doing that material review, and just evaluating how you're doing that phase. That strategic approach, again, it's just 3 steps. Evaluating, did the teacher or the professor screw you? Was it really a failure in how you took notes, or was it a failure in how you use your review method? But simply asking those 3 questions really allows you to understand where in your study method you went wrong. If your test performance was not where you wanted it to be, it allows you to make those tweaks versus trying to look for the next study method that is going to fix everything. Number 23, talking about note taking, learn how to use a QE or a question evidence style note taking. I made a video about that here. I'll link it down below in case you're interested. But gone are the ways where you should just be taking notes of just rewording what the professor's saying or what's on the PowerPoint slide, because essentially you have more words and now less words, but you still have to understand those words and then review those words. Instead, imagine everything your professor is saying and reword them into the form of a question. Look at the headings of your PowerPoint and reword them in the form of a question. And you can put those inside of your PowerPoint, you can put them into a flashcard, but using a question evidence, and again, I talk about that fully in this video right here, and I'll link out down below if you're interested, and how you can do this, examples of how to do that. I talk about it more in detail on both our Med School Success Handbook, which is absolutely free, as well as our White Coat Lab, where I teach you more step-by-step study strategies. Doing that allowed me to take quicker notes, and it allowed me to take those notes, immediately get home, and just start reviewing, which again, I talked about earlier in this video, is the most important thing you can do, just getting to the reps and the review as quickly as possible. Number 24, if you're a bad test taker, use the QAS method to avoid falling for the traps your professor and attendings are creating for yourself. This is basically looking at the questions, and instead of reading the entire stem, read the last line first, because usually it'll tell you what the question is in the first place, and half the time you'll realize that you don't even need the entire stem. Then look at the answer choices, you know what kind of answer you're going to have to try to give, and once you understand what the answers are, now go back to your stem, clinical vignette, whatever it may be, and look for evidence pointing to those individual answers, and you'll realize what are traps, and the answer that is most correct is the one that has the most evidence pointing towards it. So oftentimes when the professor is creating a test question, they want to trick you on a few of them. They want to make sure not everyone's getting 100, and so they're going to add things that are going to divert you away from the right answer, and if you start by just reading the big question vignette, you're likely going to fall for them. If you go questions, then answers, look for the evidence, and then read your vignette for evidence versus just the whole story they're telling, they'll answer your questions a lot faster, and you'll probably avoid a lot of the traps they're setting up for you. And then finally, tip 25, expect the hills and valleys and use it as a growth tool. No one has a linear or an exponentially rising medical journey. I didn't, and I feel like I've had a good deal of success and a good deal of happiness during it, but I had my ups and downs as well. And knowing that when you are feeling like you're just running up a hill that feels like it's hard to get over, that there's going to be a downhill too, where it's going to get a little easier. When you feel like you're at the bottom, there's going to be another phase of your journey where you're going to be at the top, as long as you're evaluating what changes you need to make, if some of those are within your control or not. And the hills and valleys are completely part of this journey. Use the other 24 things that we talked about to help you be happier, to help you study better, to be more productive with your time, and ultimately just to be competitive while staying sane and happy. If all of those things are things that resonate with you, number 1, make sure that you follow us here on the channel, hit that subscribe button, because all my content is dedicated to helping you with one of those 4 things: the studying, the time management, the competitiveness, and of course the happiness. And so if you want to follow a journey where you can have all 4 of those, I promise you, based off my experience, it is absolutely possible, and you don't have to feel like you're slamming your head against a wall repeatedly to get there. I'll teach you exactly how. Again, 2 resources you can check out: the free Med School Success Handbook, which 100+ tips of everything I wish somebody just gave to me on my first day of med school, It's like, do this, don't do that, and you're gonna be able to hit all 4 of those. And if you want to learn from me personally on how to hit those 4 pillars and do them with less stress, I teach those in the White Coat Lab, and you can see the results for yourself of what our past students have gotten. Just click the link down below. But as always, my friends, let me know what questions you have, what your thoughts were from these 25 tips, what tips you want me to give in future episodes and videos. And again, if you made it to the end of this video, first of all, thank you. If you enjoyed the content of this video, just hit that like button. It's one easy way of showing a thank you or your form of support to the channel. That really helps our videos get in front of more people. And if you enjoyed this video, check out this video right here on my favorite study tool that I use right now the past 2 years, as well as this video right here on all the study methods that I use to get a 3.9 GPA in med school. Enjoy those. And as always, thank you so much for being a part of my journey. Hopefully I was a little help to you guys on yours. Enjoy and have a great 2025. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.